You are listening to the story, abandoned and desperate. She offered herself, the cowboy gave her something greater. This is a tale of quiet strength and unexpected kindness. When a young woman, broken and cast aside, offers herself for shelter. A solitary cowboy surprises everyone, not with demands, but with a choice that will change both of their lives forever. The morning air in Eden's Hollow had a sharp edge, dry and brittle, carrying the faint taste of dust and wood smoke. The sun hovered low over the hills, its weak light spilling across the wooden storefronts and dirt-packed streets. Wagons creaked, passed. Men in worn coats stomped their boots on wooden porches, their voices carrying like muffled drums. And there she was, a girl barely 18. Maybe younger, stood barefoot by the livery fence, wrapped in a rough-spun grain sack tied clumsily. At her waist, her dark hair hung in limp curls, sticking to her pale, wind-chapped cheeks. Her lips were cracked, her toes bruised purple from cold. Yet she stood straight, her chin slightly raised, not defiant, but proud in a way that made her look like a stray cat, unwilling to beg for scraps. Across the street, Boonhart shifted, the weight of a feed sack on his shoulder, and paused. He hadn't planned to stop. He wasn't the sort to invite trouble or interfere with other folks' business. But something about her stillness, her silence, made the air feel heavier, thicker somehow. She wasn't crying. That was the first thing Boon noticed. She looked like she should have been, like tears would have matched the bruises on her feet and the ragged state of her dress, but her face stayed calm, her gaze fixed somewhere far away. Then he saw him, the preacher, an older man in a black coat, his collar turned up against the cold. He was close, his bony fingers curling around her elbow. Boon could hear the man's voice now, soft but sharp. "One night's warmth for a proper meal," the preacher said, his words slick and sour. "Better than the dirt, girl. What? One night in my bed, and I'll see you fed." The girl didn't flinch. She didn't pull away or argue. Her eyes remained steady, staring straight ahead, like she was anywhere but here. Boon's jaw tightened. His feet moved before his mind caught up. "You don't need to choose either," he said. His voice was low, even, but it carried across. The street, the preacher's head snapped up, his face pinched with irritation. "This ain't your concern, Hart," he said. "She's up for trade. It's no secret what she is." "She's not for trade," Boon replied, shifting the sack on his shoulder. "Oh, then you take her. Feed her. See how long before she rots your house out from under you." "I will," Boon said simply. The girl's gaze shifted to him then. For the first time, her eyes dark and unreadably locked on his. They weren't empty like he'd expected. No, they were full of something else. A storm, quiet but gathering. "What's the catch?" "Ah!" she asked softly. "Ain't one," Boon said. "You help with chores if you stay, that's all." Her lips pressed into a thin line. Her hands flexed slightly at her sides as though she were trying to remember how to move. Then she nodded once. "That's it?" "That's it." With surprising calm, she stepped away from the preacher and toward Boon, passing him without a word. She didn't look back. The preacher spat in the dirt. "You'll regret it, Hart. She's nothing but ruin." Boon didn't answer. He wasn't sure why he did it. He wasn't the kind of man to step into other folks' business. But as he followed the girl Lena, she would later tell him, he realized the air felt lighter, as if some invisible weight had shifted. The ride back was wordless. The horses' hooves clopped against frozen ground as they climbed the ridge, winding past bare juniper trees and narrow streams, still rimmed with ice. "It ain't much," Boon muttered as the cabin came into view. A one-room pine structure, the roof sagging slightly at one corner, its walls weathered to a soft gray. The barn beside it leaned like an old man, ribs of its frame showing where boards had come loose. "It's not nothing," Lena said, sliding off the horse with quiet grace. She didn't wait for him to open the door. She stepped inside and scanned. The single room, a narrow cot by the stove, a rough-hewn table, and shelves lined with jars of beans and flour. The fire had died down to a faint glow. Without a word, Lena knelt, gathered kindling, and coaxed the embers back to life. Her hands were raw, her knuckles cracked and red. "You hungry?" Boon asked, hanging his coat on a peg? She nodded once. He ladled beans from a pot into a dented tin bowl and handed it to her. She sat cross-legged on the floor and ate slowly, like each bite was something sacred. "Where are you from?" Boon tried again. She wiped her mouth with the back of her wrist. "Ain't from anywhere," he nodded. Somehow that made sense. That night, Boon climbed to the loft and left the cot by the stove for Lena. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet crackle of the fire below through the darkness.
Oh.
Her voice came soft and careful. "You got a wife?" "No," Boon said. "Why not?" He thought for a moment, the words slow to form. Never saw the point. There was no reply. But he thought he heard the faintest exhale, something between a sigh and the ghost of a laugh. And for the first time in a long while, Boon didn't feel so alone. The morning light broke gently over the ridge, soft and pale, illuminating a world still clinging to winter's chill. Frost clung stubbornly to the edges of the small cabin's single window. Inside, the air was faintly warmer just enough to keep the biting cold at bay. Boon awoke to the sound of quiet sweeping. He eased down the loft ladder, boots thudding softly against the rough floorboards. Lena was already awake, her back to him, a broom worn nearly to its bones, moving steadily across the plank floor. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, hair tied back with a piece of fraying twine. "You don't have to do that," Boon said, his voice gravelly from sleep. She didn't turn, "I know." The broom kept its rhythm. Sweep, sweep, dust rising in small, delicate clouds before settling again. He watched for a moment, unsure how to navigate this strange new presence in his home. Then, without another word, he pulled on his coat and stepped outside. The cold bit at his skin as he crossed the small yard to the barn. Frost crunched under his boots, checked on the horse, gave it feed, and fixed a loose board in the chicken pen. It felt strange knowing someone was inside the cabin. For years, silence had been his only companion. Now there was her girl who spoke little, worked hard, and carried a quiet storm in her eyes when he returned. Lena was boiling water in a dented kettle, her movements sure and practiced. The stove crackled, warmth beginning to chase the chill from the room. "Town's talking," Boon said, as he set down a fresh stack of kindling by the door. Lena didn't look up. "Let him," she said softly. "You don't care?" "Not much use caring." She wiped her hands on her skirt. "Ain't the first time folks called me worse." Her voice held no bitterness, no anger, just a kind of weary acceptance. Later, over a breakfast of cornbread and beans, Lena spoke again. "My mama died birthing me," she said matter-of-factly. "Daddy drank himself dead when I was 11. After that, I was passed around. Kin, neighbors, strangers. Some were worse than others." Boon didn't speak. He only listened. "I ain't clean," she added after a long silence. Her eyes stayed fixed on the fire. "Don't expect you to think I am." Boon met her gaze. "I don't expect you to prove anything." For a moment her face shifted just slightly, a crack in the mask she wore. But she quickly looked away, her hands tightening around her tin cup. The days settled into a quiet rhythm. Lena worked as if she had always been there, scrubbing the wash basin, sweeping boiling water for washing. She never asked what needed doing. She just did it. Boon didn't question her past. She didn't question his. When he went into town for supplies, he felt the weight of eyes following him. The whispers had already begun. "You here?" Mrs. Donnelly asked, as she handed him a sack of flour. "You brought a girl back from the livery. She ain't what you're thinking," Boon said calmly. "Doesn't matter. It's what they think." Boon left without another word. That evening, Lena was humming softly as she kneaded dough on the table, her hands moving with a quiet confidence. The sound stopped abruptly when Boon stepped inside. "You hum a lot," he observed. "Not." When people are listening, she replied with a faint, almost shy smile. Boon didn't press. He hung his coat, set down the supplies, and sat at the table, watching the flames flicker in the stove. "You ever lay with a man?" Lena asked suddenly, her voice low. Boon stiffened slightly. "No, you don't want me for that?" "No." he said again, firmer this time. Most do. I ain't most. She nodded, her hand still kneading the dough. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. You ever been hungry enough to think about selling what ain't meant to be sold? She asked, almost as if to herself. Boon. Thought of the winter his father died, of the neighbors who locked their doors while he survived on rabbit and melted snow? Yeah, he said. Lena glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Then she returned to her work, the faintest trace of color in her cheeks. That night, Boon brought in extra wood as the wind picked up outside. The sky was black and heavy with clouds. Inside, Lena knelt by the stove, coaxing warmth from the embers. I don't sleep too good, she said softly. Me neither. You get dreams? Sometimes? What about? Boon stared at the fire for a long moment. Better endings. Lena exhaled slowly. Yeah, that would be nice. The wind howled against the walls like a restless spirit. Boon climbed the loft ladder, leaving Lena to her thoughts. For the first time in months, the cabin didn't feel quite so empty. Spring crept slowly into Eden's hollow, dragging its heels like a tired old mule. The frost still clung stubbornly to fence posts, and the wind carried a dry chill that sliced through even the thickest wool. But inside Boonhart's cabin, a faint sense of warmth had begun to take root, not from the stove, but from the quiet hum of life. Lena worked like she belonged there. She swept floors, boiled water for washing, and mended small tears in Boon's threadbare coat with neat, careful stitches. She moved with a steady, silent determination, as if hard work alone could scrub away years of pain and judgment. Boon didn't stop her, didn't ask questions either. One morning, Boon saddled his horse for the trip into town. Lena was kneeling by the stove, coaxing the embers to life. Need anything? He asked. She didn't look up. Soap, if they'll sell it to you. He nodded. As he rode into Eden's hollow, Boon could feel the weight of eyes tracking him from porches and windows. Whispers coiled like smoke around the dusty streets. At the general store, Mrs. Donnelly handed over a sack of flour and salt with a tight-lipped expression. You brought a girl back from the livery, she said, voice sharp as a splinter. She ain't what you're thinking, Boon replied evenly. Doesn't matter what she is. Folks will talk, Boon said. Mrs. Donnelly sniffed, but said nothing more. Back at the cabin, Selena was kneading dough with practiced hands. Her sleeves rolled up, and her hair tied back in a fraying strip of muslin. She didn't stop when Boon stepped inside. Town's talking, he said, setting the supplies down. They always do. She replied softly. You don't care? I learned not to. Ain't no use. Boon watched her for a moment. Her hands moved steadily over the dough, strong and sure, despite their cracked skin. You hum a lot when I'm gone, he said. Lena glanced at him, the faintest hint of amusement in her eyes. I forget myself when no one's listening. That night, they ate cornbread and beans by the light of the oil lamp. The glow painted warm gold across the walls, softening the harsh edges of the room. I ever tell you about my father? Asked suddenly. Lena shook her head. Died when I was 17. Left me the land and not much else. She didn't press. She only listened, her dark eyes steady on his. Neighbors said I'd lose it within the year, he continued. Said I didn't have the spine to hold on to it, did you? She asked gently. I'm still here, he said simply. Lena nodded. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of understanding. Not pity, not judgment, just a quiet recognition of someone who had fought different battles but carried the same kind of scars. The next morning, the preacher was waiting on the trail. Boon reined in his horse, his jaw tightening. You're making a mistake, Hart, the preacher said, his breath fogging in the cold air. That girl's poison. Seen her offer herself in broad daylight. You were the one she offered to? Boon replied without flinching. She's got no place in this town. She's got a place with me. You planning to marry her? Claim her in church? Boon's eyes narrowed. I don't need to say it out loud for it to be true. The preacher's mouth thinned to a grim line. God's watching, Boon said flatly. He'll see you first. That evening, Boon returned to find Lena sitting on the porch steps, arms wrapped around her knees. She looked small in his oversized coat, her face pale in the dying light. "I can leave if I'm too much trouble," she said softly. Boon sat beside her. The wood creaked under his weight. "You think I'm made of paper?" he asked. "No." Her voice was barely a whisper. "But I think I am. You're stronger than you think." She turned her face toward him, eyes glistening, not with tears, but with something deeper, heavier. "You don't know what I've done. Don't need to." For a long moment, they sat in silence, watching the sky turn shades of lilac and gold as the sun dipped below the ridge. "Somewhere in the distance!" a coyote cried, its voice lonely and sharp. Later, inside the cabin, Lena placed a small tin charm on the table. "It was bent into the rough shape of a horse. Made it when I was little," she said. "Don't know why I kept it." Boon picked it up carefully, turning it over in his calloused fingers. "Thank you. You don't have to say that." "Mean it." Lena looked away, her hands tightening in her lap. She didn't trust kindness. Not yet, but she wanted to. That night, as the wind pressed cold fingers through the cracks in the cabin walls, Boon lay awake in the loft, listening to her steady breathing below. For the first time, the silence didn't feel so empty. The first real signs of spring crept over the ridge like a cautious animal, tiny buds on the juniper branches, the faintest warmth in the morning air. Yet Eden's Hollow remained cold in other ways. The whispers hadn't stopped. If anything, they'd grown sharper. "They say, you brought home one of those girls?" Mrs. Donnelly hissed to a neighbor as Boon passed through the general store. He didn't rise to it. He never did. But as he loaded flour and coffee into his saddlebag, he felt the weight of every gaze on his back. At the cabin, Lena was hanging freshly laundered clothes on a rope strung between two sagging posts. The wind caught her hair, pulling loose strands across her face. She looked up as Boon approached, her expression unreadable. "You got what you needed?" she asked. Mostly. She didn't ask about the town. She didn't need to. That night, as they ate in companionable silence, Lena spoke first. "You ever think about leaving?" "Every spring," Boon admitted, "but something always kept me here." "What?" He shook his head.
"Don't know.
Maybe the land's as stubborn."
"As I am." The next morning, trouble came on horseback. Boon's Uncle Nate Hart rode up the trail with 2 hired men and the sheriff trailing close behind. Nate was a tall, wiry man with a face sharpened by years of bitterness. His eyes swept over Boon's small cabin, his lips curling in disdain. "You wasting good land on a girl who don't belong?" Nate called as he dismounted. "She belongs here," Boon replied calmly, stepping down from the porch. "You planning to marry her then? Claim her proper?" Nate sneered. "I don't need paper to know what I choose." The sheriff, a heavyset man with tired eyes, shifted in his saddle. "This land's his, Nate. You want it back? File through the courts?" "This ain't right," Nate snapped. "Maybe not," the sheriff admitted. "But it's just," Nate spat in the dirt. "You'll regret this, boy. She's nothing but trouble." Boone's jaw tightened. "Not to me." As the riders disappeared over the ridge, Lena stood half hidden in the doorway, her fingers clutching the frame. "I can leave," she said quietly. "You wouldn't have to fight on my account." "You think I'm made of paper?" Boon asked. Echoing his words from nights ago, she shook her head. "No, but I think I am." "You're stronger than you know," he said again. She wanted to believe him, but belief had always been the hardest thing for her to hold. Later, Lena placed a scrap of red fabric in the window, a quiet, defiant signal that she wasn't running this time. When Boon returned from checking fence lines, he noticed the cloth fluttering in the breeze. He said nothing, but his lips twitched in the faintest shadow of a smile. That evening, he brought her a small wooden box. Inside were 2 combs carved from bone. "These were my mother's." Lena traced the delicate patterns with her fingers, her throat tightening. "No one's ever given me something just." "Because," she whispered, "I'm not most people," Boon replied simply. That night, as the wind whispered over the roof, Lena spoke from her cot by the stove. "I thought I had to earn a future, You did, Boon said from the loft. The next morning, Eden's Hollow felt different. Lena couldn't say why. Perhaps it was the sound of birds returning, or the way the sunlight spilled golden over the hills. Perhaps it was the first time in years she didn't feel like she had to run. Spring arrived slowly, like a tired animal dragging itself over the hills. The snow melted in patches, leaving the ground muddy and raw. The trees began to bud in tentative greens, and the air carried the first hints of warmth. At Boon's cabin, life moved in quiet rhythms. Lena swept the porch, her borrowed boots too big for her feet. She paused now and then to breathe in the crisp air, the scent of wet earth and pine. For the first time in years, she felt like she was part of something, not just passing through, not just surviving. Inside, Boon worked at the table, repairing a broken hinge. His hands were steady, his jaw set. When Lena stepped in with a basket of kindling, she hesitated at the sight of him. "You always live up here?" she asked. "Since I was 17, my daddy died sudden. Left me the land and not much else." "It feels like a place the world forgot," Boon nodded. "Sometimes that's a mercy." "You ever wish you left?" "Every spring," he admitted. "But something always made me stay." "What?" He didn't answer, and she didn't press. That afternoon, a knock came at the door, a sharp, insistent sound that startled them. Both. Boon's hand hovered near the rifle, leaning against the wall as he opened the door. It was Nate, his uncle, flanked by the sheriff and a thin man with gray whiskers clutching legal papers. "You had your time." "Boon," Nate said, stepping. "On to the porch. This place is wasted on you." Boon squared his shoulders. "It's standing. Better than you left it." The sheriff raised a hand. "Nate, let's keep this civil. You got proof of ownership?" "Same proof my father had before him." Thin man cleared his throat. "This is a matter for the courts, not the cabin steps." Nate's eyes darted to Lena, standing quietly in the doorway. "This girl don't belong," he sneered. "You gonna lose it all over a whore?" Boon's jaw flexed. "She's not what you think. She's not yours either. She's not anyone's," Boon said. Then, after a beat, "except by her own choice." The sheriff let out a long breath. "I see a man keeping what's his. That's enough for me." Nate spat into the dirt. "You'll regret this, boy. I'll take that chance." When the riders finally left, the tension in the air melted like frost under sunlight. Now Boon turned to Lena, his expression unreadable. "You stayed," he said softly. "So did you," she replied. He reached for her hand, not stopping short. This time, their fingers met, warm and real. "I thought I had to earn a future," Lena whispered. "You did," Boon said. That evening, the cabin felt different. Not just a place to survive, but a home. Lena baked bread not out of necessity, but because she wanted the air to smell of something warm. She didn't ask if Boon noticed. He didn't say. But he lingered longer near the stove, his shoulders less tense than usual. Later, Lena handed him a folded scrap of muslin. "It's the only thing I never gave away," she said, "because it was the only thing that ever felt like home." Boon unfolded it carefully, reverently. "You sure?" he asked. She smiled softly. "I don't need it anymore." Boon stood, brushed flour from his hands, and kissed her, not with urgency. Not with pity, but gently, like a promise. For the first time in her life, Lena didn't feel rescued. She felt chosen. As spring settled over the ridge, the cabin stood, firm against the whispers of the town and the threats of men. Inside, two people began building something stronger than wood or stone, a future neither of them had dared to dream.